Hello everyone, I'm bringing you a video today which is somewhat of a niche topic, and not specifically militaria of course, but aimed primarily at reenactors, I guess at collectors as well, if you're looking to put together contents for holdalls and wash kits and so forth for soldiers. What we're looking at here are post-Second War era razors through basically to the end of the Cold War, the early 1990s, so appropriate razors for inclusion in soldiers' small kit from around that time. Now, I've looked at wartime razors to a degree previously on the channel, but I wanted to make a video looking post-war era, the Cold War, and obviously there's a lot of variety here. The razor technology developed a great deal during the period, the introduction of cartridge razors and so forth, which we'll talk about here. As I say, this isn't specifically militaria, but useful for putting together small kits, soldier small kits. So I thought it would be interesting, and it's not, of course, it's not exclusive to British in many instances. Gillette and so forth were global brands and were very popular worldwide. So from that point of view, obviously there's a bit of scope here for this being useful for Commonwealth and indeed other armies as well. If you're looking to sort of put together a set of soldiers' equipment for display and so forth, this could well be useful. That's what we're going to have a look at now. So razors, we have a little lineup here, basically post-war era razors, all civilian of course, but useful bits and pieces to know about in terms of putting together kit, soldiers' small kit from the Cold War period. So most of these come from Gillette. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and we'll talk about that as we look at these in more detail. Obviously we're going from earlier to later across, and we have the move from classic safety razors to cartridge razors, obviously with a disposable thrown in there as well. So starting on the left here, we have a Gillette Super Speed, and this is a 1950s example, I believe. I'm not an expert when it comes to dating razors, but from the research I've done, I believe this is a 1950s Super Speed, and this is not a three-part razor. It opens up like this to allow you to insert the blades, and then you simply pull down and screw that closed, and that holds the blade in place. Now these have been around for, well, they were introduced in the 1940s, I believe, slightly different design at that time. This, as I say, is probably a 50s example, and they were produced through into the 1960s and possibly into the 70s as well, but certainly into the 1960s. The 60s, again, slightly different design on the handle, slightly modified. But you see this flared end here, that marks this out probably as a 50s example, given all the other details. So that's one example of a 50s razor, but again would carry you through to the 1960s. And you have here an example of probably immediate post-war blades, I would say. These would be replaced pretty quickly, but there are adverts for these in 1945, and it's Gillette in battle dress, and these are the wartime economy blades, basically the Gillette standard blade made of basically slightly lower quality steel and so forth, but nevertheless the advertising at the time said they'd do just as good a job, and these would be around in the immediate post-war years, so sort of the early national service era. You'd still have seen these standard blades around. Moving on a little bit further, talking more about the 1960s here, we have a Gillette Tech, and this is a three-part razor. So these were again produced from the 1930s, and they're just as simply, it's another Gillette product, a different type of razor, and it's a three piece, as you can see here. You put the blade in between the two parts of the head there, and then screw the handle on to hold it all together. And this is a late 60s, 70s production Tech. So this would be from, I believe, 1966 onwards because of the typeface here, but this basic design, three-piece razor with a stamped plate here at the top, had been around since the 30s, which is when these were introduced. So if you look for different versions of Tech, you can get several different versions of them, and they'll carry you right the way through if you reenact different periods or collect different periods. But as I say, this is a late 60s, 70s example, and this I often use with my Australian Vietnam War era kit. It would be suitable from that period, or indeed British Army of the Rhine 1970s. It'd be very typical to see one of these in use. And we have some more examples of blades here. We have some Gillette blue blades, which remained in this sort of antique looking packaging for a very long time. So post-war, this style of packaging was in use for quite a while, and Gillette thin blades as well. And these were two very popular brands of blade from Gillette. And again, the packaging for these remained fairly consistent for certainly through until the 60s, I believe, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. I'm not an expert on the blade packaging. Whoops, dropped the blue blades there. But certainly this design of Gillette blue packaging lasted a very long time, and I think the thin blade packaging did as well with the red and black there, as you can see. So we have those two Gillette blades there to take a look at as well for that sort of time period. Alongside these, you will also see in the later 60s and into the 70s, you see safety razors with longer plastic handles, as we have here, and some with longer metal handles as well. This is typical for these three-piece razors, or indeed the super speeders we have here, to have this sort of length of handle. But during the 60s and 70s in particular, you see them with longer handles, and this is just an example of that with a longer plastic handle. This is basically a knockoff version of the Tech. It's essentially the same design of three-piece head, the same sort of stamped shape and everything, but it is not a Gillette product, and it's one I picked up, as I say, just to sort of represent that era, the late 60s, 70s, and these would be used through until the 80s as well, of course. Obviously, those who were familiar with using them would not necessarily move on to more modern designs, would continue using them. So we have that there. It's basically a knockoff version of a Tech with a plastic handle in place of the metal handle. We have some more blades to look at here as well. We have some Wilkinson sword blades. These, I believe, from possibly the 60s or 70s. Have those there, so would be suitable for use with this sort of razor. And we have slightly later, possibly going into the 80s, Wilkinson sword dispenser here, so you can slide the blades out like that. And that's another thing to look for. There were various different types of dispensers produced from the 50s onwards, really, by Gillette and Wilkinson sword and so forth. So that's just one example of the dispensers you can find. And that's quite a neat way of keeping hold of the blades if you want spare blades as part of your collection and display. The 1970s, shaving technology began to change quite rapidly, and one of the big changes was the introduction of disposable razors. Now, these are famous, infamous, the Bic disposable razor. This is fairly modern, but made to exactly the same design as the 70s, the initial 1975 introduction of these. Orange handle, white plastic head, single blade. That's the important thing for these at the time, is single blade. They're now made with multiple blades, but when they were initially introduced, they just had the single blade version. Obviously has this orange plastic protector. Very, very lightweight, and certainly something that was used. There are photographs of troops in the Falklands with these. When I made a video looking at Hold All contents, included a Bic razor, and some veterans commented that they were not permitted to use these. They were actually instructed to use a higher quality razor. Certainly Bics would not have been acceptable, but they certainly were used in some instances. So again, in particular instances, could be a suitable thing to have in soldier small kit. Moving on a little bit further, we have here an early cartridge razor, and obviously there's some crossover with these. Not everyone moved over to new technology straight away, of course. Some men would have been quite happy with the older designs, but this is a particular design of razor which was mentioned when the Bic came up. Well, this was one of the razors that was mentioned as being acceptable, which is the Gillette Contour. And this is an early cartridge razor. You can see here it has a cartridge, well, the blades on a plastic cartridge there, which clips in like this. If I can do this looking through the camera, which I probably can't. There we go. Got that lock back on there. And that's just released with that black plastic button there. I know I've missed with one of the claws. There we go. Got it on now. Difficult looking through the camera. So we have Gillette Contour there with metal handle. This actually has the Gillette, now whether we'll be able to see or not, has a Gillette date code on the underside here. And this dates this to 1980. And these were introduced in the 1970s. And you can see spare blades here in a plastic holder, as you would expect to see with more modern safety razors, more modern razors, typical packaging of the time. And very, very common in the 80s, very popular in the 80s. And as I say, one of the razors that was mentioned as being sort of acceptable. And I think that was a regimental thing, if I remember correctly from what was said, that there was sort of an edict handed down of what sort of razor was acceptable, what would give you a clean enough shave to be acceptable. So the Gillette Contour was one of those. This, as I say, 1980. In the later 80s, you do see them with a plastic handle as well. We have an example of that here. They are not difficult to find, but are actually fairly expensive. I'm not quite sure why, but the handles for these are quite sought after. I actually use one of these, or a modern equivalent, as my day-to-day razor. It's a two-bladed head on it, and I find that works very well for me. And they just shaves better, I've found, than the sort of multi-bladed modern razors, so I've stuck with it. And you can still get new blades for them, marketed under the Artra name. They're still manufactured, still quite popular out in other parts of the world, India and so forth. So because of the internet, it's very easy to get hold of blades for these, or heads for these. So that's a quick run through these razors. As I say, not exhaustive. I'm not an expert on vintage razors, but I thought it would be worth to show a little bit of a timeline here of those I've picked up to complete soldier small kit. and hopefully it'll be useful for people. As I say, just giving the names, for example, gives you a chance to go and look and research and maybe find different versions of these for different periods if you want to, for different sets of kit. And there's plenty of information available online as well. Lots of forum posts, lots of information on websites with people who do collect razors. So it's worth going and having a look. It's quite an important piece of kit for Soldier Small Kit, of course. Another thing to quickly mention, of course, is Gillette in particular, very popular global brand, and certainly this would be a very ubiquitous razor to see in various different militaries and soldiers' small kit at the time. If we have a quick look at the back of here, you can see, there we go, distributed by all the different areas you would have seen these, and made in United Kingdom, of course, as you can see, but distributed to all these places. So that's just an example of how much of a global brand Gillette was, and still is, of course. So hopefully it's been interesting looking through these, as I say, and hopefully it's been useful. Just a quick run through these razors which I've picked up to complete Soldier Small Kit, and yeah, hopefully it's been informative. That's the idea. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. As I say, primarily aimed at reenactors who may well want to display Soldier Small Kit, but obviously I guess from a collecting point of view as well, this could be interesting if you're looking to put together an individual soldier's kit from a collecting point of view, purely from a collecting point of view. As I say, basically something I had to look into, look back on the channel at the previous videos I've made talking about razors and hold all contents and so forth, mainly in a Second War context. So I thought a video following up on that and looking at the Cold War era might be useful for some as well. If you have found this useful, or indeed found it interesting in general, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using both of those methods. It really is greatly appreciated. As I always say, thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.